So at first, I really liked this amp. Then I realized it was me wanting to like this amp. That soon turned to disappointment, and the disappointment turned into excruciating buyer's remorse. We've all had that. But in the end, like all good Disney stories, something magical happened. Hi guys, Mid-Fi Guy here. Today I have the Cayin HA-6A vacuum tube amplifier. I did an unboxing video, so if you haven't seen that, check it out. I go through some preliminary stuff, so I won't get into too much detail with what I went through there, but I'm just going to give you an overview on the features. Okay, front panel of the Cayin. But again, you have the power button, so right next to it, you'll see the different options for the headphones. So you got your 1/4 inch Pentagon and balanced XLR. So you see you have the switcher here for the phones. So they won't play more than one at the same time, unfortunately. So you just have to switch back and forth. The impedance selector, the thresholds are as follows. Low is 8 through 64 ohms. Medium is 65 through 250. And the high is 251 through 600. Okay, here you got your volume meters. You can see they're going right now. They work great as intended. They don't really distract from the experience. I don't really notice them. It's just a cool kind of aesthetic thing. And I guess you can look to see if you're having imbalance issues or a question about imbalance. You can monitor these. And it's a great touch that Cayin provided. So on to the right of the panel, let's quickly talk about this. It's just the switcher sources between XLR RCA. Very self-explanatory. So this is the part that's probably the most interesting about this amp. Not a lot of other amps do this. If there are, it's not very many. But you have the opportunity to switch between triode mode and ultralinear mode. They give two different sound signatures. And let me just tell you how Cayin themselves describes it. They say triode mode is rich in harmonics, it's smooth, it's lush. It's ideal for vocal and string music. Now to switch to ultralinear, they say it gives improved power and extension, clean, energetic, authoritative. It's ideal for music that requires a lot of punch, dynamics, and control. Your mileage may vary. It's great. I actually switch back and forth with this depending on the song I'm listening to. And honestly, this ultralinear is great, but it sounds more solid state with the vacuum tube feel. So on to the volume potentiometer. This starts here. It's about, let's say, 3 millimeter increments. It's 24 steps. Cayin built it in-house along with most other things in this amp, which is great. It's the same one that's in the Cayin HA-300. It's high quality. It gives a nice feel. It's not like too clicky, but you definitely know when you're starting to move it and when it's ending. And it doesn't really bug me. A lot of stepping potentiometers, they're super loud and they're super annoying when I'm listening to my music. This one doesn't bug me at all. On your back, you have your balanced XLR inputs. You have your single-ended RCA inputs. You have a switch that switches your power tubes from KT88s to EL34s. And last but not least, you have a power adapter IEC plug. Something to note when you're changing the power tube type from KT88s to EL34s or vice versa, the switch is very recessed. It's a bit hard to get it with your fingernail. I really recommend using a tool such as a small screwdriver or something, just because there's been many times where I get the switch halfway and I didn't even know it. But a tool will help you get it all the way to the end of the switch. Okay, now on to the build and the aesthetics of the amp. The HA-6A borrows a lot from Cayin's HA-300, their top tier tube amp. You got the same milled aluminum front panel, the shielded transformers, the super solid bass. There's not much I can say bad about the aesthetics. And it also comes with this cage. I took it off for purposes of the review, but let's put it on so you can see it. It is kind of a pain to get these binding posts in and out. of the slots. So you can see me struggling. And you could see, if anything, it helps you from touching the tubes. They get super hot, and especially if you have children, you want to keep this on 100% of the time. The tubes, I think I heard 300 degrees Fahrenheit. They get super hot inside. But for the purpose of the review, let's take it off. And you can see it's a lot easier to take off than it is to put on. And let's talk about the weight. I know I mentioned it in the unboxing, but reviewers consider amps bigger than 10 pounds heavy. For hi-fi equipment, especially head-fi equipment, anything more than 10 pounds, I guess, is the threshold that other reviewers consider heavy. So on a scale of the Felix Euphoria, I did the research on this, another popular tube amp, it is 13 pounds. The Wu Audio WA22, that amp is 25 pounds. This baby, the HA-6A, it comes in at a whopping 43 pounds. So, it's definitely a big weight difference there. It is back end heavy, just due to the transformers. They're the heaviest component of the amp. So keep that in mind when you're moving it around. And yeah, just as a point of reference too, the HA-300 I think is 70 or 75 pounds. That is a monster amp. They do divide it between two different cases, so you can divide it up that way, but still, they make some monster stuff. You have fair warning when it's time to move or you want to resell this. Other points about the build, they use point-to-point wiring. They use silver-plated copper wire. It's OCC copper, single crystal, as they put it. Really high quality. Felix, for the Euphoria, they used 100% silver wire. It's great that we have vacuum tube amps in this price range that are paying this much attention to detail on the inside. All the transformers, they're built in-house. It helps them to specifically match amp requirements for the impedance switch. They designed everything from the ground up. They have 27 years, Cayin as a company, 27 years in the business, so they know what they're doing. Another point to talk about is the inputs. So RCA versus XLR. I use XLR just because I have a bunch of gear and wire behind my desk here, and I just want to make sure there's no interference. XLR is good at stamping that out. The thing is with the XLR on the Cayin, it's loud. I guess, it's line level inputs. It's not super loud or anything, but it affects the volume potentiometer. So when you, ramp it up from 1 to 2 to 3, if you're on a high impedance headphone, it makes a big difference. If it's an issue for you, then you should consider using the single-ended RCA inputs. They come in lower volume, so you can have more flexibility with the volume knob. You could also turn down the volume on your source or use a preamp. It's up to you, but just letting you know the difference between XLR versus RCA inputs. And one con I'll say about the build, they ship with a 16 gauge power cable. It's a general power cable, it's nothing special. It's 16 gauge isn't huge or small by any means, but there is an issue when you plug it in. It is a bit looser. The connection is a bit looser than other head-fi equipment that I've used. So if you have an aftermarket cable for power that has a more of a snug fit, you may find that it works well with the Cayin HA-6A. But overall, it's a gorgeous amp. You can't really knock the looks. Aesthetically, it's just amazing, especially when the lights dim, you see the tubes light up, and especially with the volume meter. Everything is done right. I can't really knock the looks at all. I'd give it a 9 out of 10. Now let's talk about the tubes. These are your power rectification tubes. You got your KT88s in the back. Those are for power amplification. And you got your preamp tubes here. It's the 12A U7s. I'm keeping the KT88s here for now just for presentational purpose. It looks better. They're bigger than the EL34s, which you can switch out for the back here. And most of you may actually prefer KT88s. I, however, prefer the EL34s. KT88s are, I would say they're more, at least in the implementation of this amp, maybe it's true in general as well, but the KT88s tend to be more fuller bodied, more balanced. They don't really have an overly lush presentation. But for me, I'm looking for that lush presentation. I'm looking for smooth dynamics, no extremes, non-fatiguing sound. I already have a nice solid state amplifier, so when I went to a tube, I wanted to get that lush sound, something very different than what I can get from a solid state. So back to the buyer's remorse bit that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. When I first plugged the HA-6A into my Arias, I was expecting to hear the same sound signature that I did from the Manly Absolute that I heard at Can Jam, and also the RS Uterp that I mentioned in the other video previously. I wanted to hear that euphoric, buttery smooth sound signature that I heard. Unfortunately, I didn't get that sound, not even close. I did, however, get really good, powerful dynamic sound from a tube amplifier with little to no interference, no noise, and that's amazing. That said, why did I need another amplifier that sounded like my Violectric V280? It's just a solid state amplifier getting solid state sound. Did I need to package up and return the Cayin to get the sound that I was after? That would have been a pain in the butt. I was told by a user on Headphone to let the amp burn in for 50 to 70 hours before any critical listening. And personally, I sort of believe the idea of burning in electronics. I don't have dealing with solid state amplifiers and planars. Usually those are my go-tos. It's not something I tend to do. That said, I did hear a big difference in burning in my Sennheiser HD-6XX, which are the 650s. When I first got them, I hated the sound, and then over time, I just loved them, and now they're one of my top headphones. So back to 50 to 70 hours of burning in. Who has time for 2 days of burning in? I wanted to hear music. I wanted to hear glorious tube sound. So I was a little impatient. I kept on making notes for my review, and I just kept listening to music as normal. I read around some more, and many people mentioned tube rolling. I was hoping to avoid it. It's just because I hate the idea of just plugging in and out new tubes, scouring eBay for random tubes. But I bit the bullet and I bought some reissued Millards for the EL34s and the 12 AU7s. And I burned it in a little bit, not too much. I think several hours while I went to do an errand. I came back and I liked the sound. There was definitely a change in sound signature. So I was starting to get pleased with what I was hearing. Still, I wasn't satisfied, and for $2,500 retail, that's what this retails at, I wanted to be more than satisfied. I wanted to be ecstatic. It wasn't until I got some cheap NOS, new old stock Sylvania tubes from eBay that I decided, hey, you know what? Let's burn these in. Let's just go with what people are saying. And from there I can make a more informed or full-rounded opinion. So I decided to do the pink noise burn-in technique overnight, which is just go to Tidal, Spotify, whatever you're using, and search for pink noise. Just play it on repeat, the whole album. It's just like white noise. I don't know why it's called pink noise, but I let that play overnight. With the other tubes having proper burn-in time at this point, I was hoping to hear a big change in sound signature the next morning. So I woke up the next morning, powered up the amp, turned on the DAC, opened up Tidal, hit play, and let me tell you, this is where I'm saying this is where magic happens. The amp was finally alive, providing music that felt organic, giving character to every note. As luck would have it, my ZMF Aeolus arrived the same day that this was all going on, and I was pretty much in pure audio heaven at this point. I was getting close to the sound of the Manly Absolute at near half the price. I was and I am just very ecstatic at this whole thing. Let that be a lesson to you non-burn-in believers out there. It's time to join the burn-in cult and, let this burn in overnight. Use some peak noise, whatever you want, but let this burn in 2 days straight and then start to listen critically. You may have that wake-up moment like I did. So on to the sound review. So triode versus ultralinear. I know most of you are curious about that. I was too. So based on Cayin's own recommendations, I do agree with it. Triode definitely is more of a lush, smooth sound signature. Ultralinear is more exact. It's more solid state, I'd say, still with a tube presentation. So triode mode. I prefer triode mode with songs that are vocal heavy, songs that have some strings, have a lot of brass instruments. If you want that lush feel, triode mode is the way to go, and it does make a difference. The beauty of it is you can choose whichever mode you like based on your song, based on your headphone, your setup, everything. So it's great that that option's there. For ultra linear, and I am looking at my notes here, it's best when used with electronic music, indie synth music, pop, hip hop. If you want some dynamics, if you want some impact, ultra linear is the way to go. So if we're talking about songs, Violin Concerto number 1, I'll put the link to it in the description. There's a violin solo at the very beginning. I listened to this with my arias in ultra linear mode. It sounded gorgeous. The violin pierces through, and it just sounds very precise, very exact again in planars with the ultra linear on. I'm hearing details galore, natural attack and delay. It just sounds very real, more real than any other amp I've heard, and that includes the V280. Other amps I've owned in the past, the Liquid Platinum, the Sennheiser HDVA 600, the NFB11, all solid state. One's the hybrid, the Liquid Platinum. But still, this just trumps them all when you're looking for a realistic presentation. It smooths out the extremes while retaining the parts that you want to hear with great detail. And this, in a nutshell, is why audio nuts tend to love tubes. So Dinner at 8 by Rufus Wainwright. At around 2 minutes, 10 seconds, there's a lot going on. There's a full orchestra ramping up in volume. There's a piano, there's vocals, male vocals all raising in volume. And the Cayin HA-6A kind of sorts it all out. Like, I don't feel overwhelmed. On solid state, I tend to turn down the volume. Everything's getting smoothed out. I feel like I don't need to touch anything. I let it run on autopilot and I just sit back and enjoy the music. Not only can I pick apart what's going on, but it's just non-fatiguing at all. So Lost in Japan, let's switch over to some pop music. Lost in Japan by Shawn Mendes in triode mode. It sounds a bit muddy. I don't know if that's a proper term for it, but it's pop music. You want to hear some impact, some dynamics. I wouldn't recommend triode mode for something like pop or for this song in general. I switched over to ultra linear. I got more dynamics, got more detail. Was very happy with what I was hearing. In general, this makes me glad ultra linear is an option. Other tube amps, you're just stuck with what you get. You have to switch out tubes to hear the sound. You don't have to do that with this option here, which is great. And on to my favorite song so far with this amp, Imagine by Chris Clafford. Just in particular because it's mostly just him with his guitar and his voice. Both are amazing. So when I hear the decay of a guitar string, I'm going to describe it to you this way, but it's like rainfall, like slow motion rain droplets, just falling in slow motion. They burst right next to your eardrum and out comes the note. It's just lush, it's smooth, and you can't say a bad thing about it. It's pretty amazing. As for changing out the tubes, Andy Kong, a Cayin representative, he's on Headphone, he's pretty active, but you can search his posts. He generally recommends you switch out the preamp tubes, in our case the 12AU7s, before the power tubes. You want to change the sound upstream, and then the power tubes will just amplify whatever it's getting from the preamp tubes. So that's where I got the new old stock Sylvanias. It did make a huge difference. I got that lush sound that I was looking for. So change the small ones out before the big ones. So now let's talk about the sound pros and cons. Pros, great tonal character with very little veiling. We got a wide sound stage, simply amazing layering. It's very responsive to tube rolling. If I switch these out to the electro harmonics, I'll hear a definite difference. You will too. Great power output to planars. It's not an OTL amp. It does have transformers, but it gives us that power for, flexible outputs to different headphones. I've heard that they've powered an Abyss if you check the Headphone thread. They power other planars with ease, and the same applies to my Arias and my other planars here. And possibly the best thing when you're talking tube amplifiers, I didn't hear any microphonics and little to no interference. I did have an issue with the right tube here for the electro harmonics. I was getting just constant static on my right ear, and it did trace back to the tube. I had to take it out, put it back in, and then the constant hiss was gone. So if you run into that problem, check your tube connection and, go from there. Sound cons. The stock tubes suck. Electro harmonics, they're the general tube that most amplifiers ship their amp with, just because they're polite, they're kind of sterile, and you want some flavor out of your amp. I wasn't pleased with the stock tubes at all, but you know, you're $30 away from changing them out. Although there's no major noise or interference, you do get some hiss with the high impedance headphones, typically with your dynamic headphones. This is more prevalent on the HD-6XX compared to the others, but I did hear it on the Sony Z7s and a little bit on the ZMF Aeolus. If I had to choose two words to describe this amp, it would be versatile and clean. When I say clean, I just mean the overall sound. No matter which tube configuration you use, the sound is just, it can be as uncolored or colored as you'd like it. It's just good, high quality, detailed, layered sound coming out of this amp. So let's quickly talk about how the headphones I have mate with the Cayin HA-6A. I won't go into too much detail with everything that I have here. Maybe I'll make a written review about everything else, but I'll stick with my top three. I'll start at number 3. So this is the Aria, Hi-Fi Man Aria, and I would say for a planar, this is top notch. I love the sound that comes out of an Aria. It's just amazing, it's detailed, it's precise. As for mating it with the HA-6A, you know, you lose some mids here, but especially with the Aria. I found I got more mids coming from the other two planars, if you can believe it. But as far as detail retrieval and just wide open soundstage, this takes the cake. I just felt that the other two dynamics played into the strengths of the Cayin. So this is number 3. Number 2 goes to the HD-6XX. I love this headphone. I hated it at first, like I said before, but it really grew on me, and then you come to realize the mids are really important when it comes to music and vocals and everything in between. So these come next. They don't have the detail retrieval as the other two, but when it comes to silky smooth mids, these are the highest that I could recommend. So keep these on your list. And number 1, last but not least, the ZMF Aeolus. I was reading around for smooth, lush mid presentation. These take the cake, and they weren't lying. So you do get the mids, the silky smooth mids of the HD-6XX, not to the level of the Sennheisers, but they're here, they're definitely here. It's smooth and it's lush, but you have the added benefit of getting the details. You get some crisp highs, you get some really good bass, and it's really hard to find a fault with these headphones. I've heard the Auteur is better at detail retrieval, it's a better balanced headphones, but if I just want to enjoy my music, I can't knock these at all. So kudos to ZMF. So, the overall pros and cons. Let's start with the pros. Amazing versatility. This amp is a tube roller's dream, and after you choose your tube configuration, you have 2 different listening modes on top of that. Great features out of the box. Has the Pentacon connector, has 3 impedance options, and also a power tube selector. Extras. Great that Cayin provides a high quality KT88 tube set with the gold lines. Wish they did the same with the EL34s, but at least they start you off with a pair. Most companies wouldn't even do that. Value. Rock solid, sexy construction, looking better than anything else in its price range. Point-to-point silver-plated OCC copper wiring, designing and building of major components in-house, and Cayin's 27-year pedigree all come together to produce an amazing piece of kit. Now let's go through the cons. The stock preamp tubes are lackluster, let's just face it. You're going to want to upgrade those as soon as you can. Adjusting the volume in high impedance mode is way too sensitive. And may as well put this on here, but the weight, it is really heavy. Once it's in place, you know, you don't care. But when you have to move it, it's just going to be a pain to pick it up and place it somewhere else. So let's talk about competitors. If you want to look at other amps and, you know, compare, so there is the Wu Audio WA22, same price as this. There is the Mogami SE, a little bit more expensive. There's a Glen OTL custom-made amp. You can find them on Headphone. Of course, the Felix Audio Euphoria. That's a very popular amp. A little bit less than this. I think it comes in at $2,100 unless you get it in the States from the local dealer. It is an OTL amp, so it may have issues powering your planars or harder to drive cans. There's the RS HA-2 SE. Not nearly as feature-filled as this, but it is an option. So look around, compare, contrast, see what works for your application. This has tons of flexibility, so I don't think you can go wrong with this. And there you have it. I probably said way too much on this amp, but I can't stop talking about it. I love it. It's just, you get that feeling where you wake up in the morning, you look forward to listening to it. That's what I have right now. You can keep me in quarantine forever. I'm very happy with this, with my headphone setup as well. But yeah, if you have a comment, question, put it down in the comments. Happy to read them and reply. I'll see about making a written review. If I do, then I'll link it in the description. But that's all for now. Thanks, guys.